Always with love. Okay, just to kind of start us off so I can figure out the crowd, how many people actually know what TDD, like when they see the acronym TDD, go, okay, I know what you're talking about? Awesome. Okay, by show of hands, how many people would consider themselves, we'll call it dev-ish? Okay, hands down. How many people would consider themselves ops-ish? And that either the rest of you that are like kind of in between, QA, UI. Okay, cool. All right, so starting off with a little bit about me. My name's Christopher Weber. I am currently an infrastructure engineer at Demand Media. We manage operations for, well, my team anyway manages operations for crack.com, livestrong.com, ehow.com, and then a portfolio of other smaller sites like dailypuppy.com and airliners.net. We're hiring, and more importantly, my team is hiring. So if you're looking for an awesome ops position, hit me up. Okay, so I have always been in ops or support. Development is not really something I've done. Yes, I've hacked together some janky PHP code, and I'm not afraid to bust out with some Ruby, but I am not a developer. And even there, I really have not worked heavily with developers until very, very recently. I've been doing Puppet since about 2008. For those of you that are in the Puppet realm of the world, that's version 0.24.7, so I've been around a little while. And I really just started looking at testing about a year ago. As a quick mention, I'm going to talk a little bit about Chef, but I am absolutely in no way an expert in Chef. So if you have questions about Chef, I probably don't know the answer, but I will try my best. Also, if I use a term, if I talk about something and you're like, what in God's name is he talking about? Raise your hand, please, so I can actually define that, because I always forget those little things. Okay, so we're going to talk about why testing, what is testing, what to test, steps. The other thing that's curiously missing from this list is how to test. If you want to talk how to test in your local in the LA area, LA DevOps, I'm going to be giving a presentation very similar to this, but I'm also going to focus on how you actually test your Puppet manifests, given the constraints I'm talking about today. Okay, so why testing? What I thought, oh, it'll help me catch mistakes, test that things work. This will be awesome, because testing is awesome, right? Like, that's what all the Ruby folks tell me. I really did not start writing tests. I was like, this is dumb. I started re-implementing my manifests in rspec. Rspec, for those of you that don't know, is a testing framework in Ruby. It's really nice and easy to write, but it was just dumb for me. I looked at it, no lie. I was looking at my code, and I got to the point that I just started copying my manifest over and modifying it to meet the same syntax that rspec used. So I looked for a little bit of guidance on what to test and why to test, and the response was, oh, just re-implement your manifest in testing. Oh, this is dumb. So the other thing is I found out it doesn't actually test anything that anything worked. You're just testing that your catalog is right, which I'll explain in a little bit what that actually means. And I really didn't understand that there are different types of testing. And that was just totally blew me away. Testing? Okay, we're going to test that it works, right? Yeah, not so much. So if that's the case, then why are we here? Why am I talking about TDD? Why am I on stage? I got to a point where I realized we can test configuration beyond what is specifically in the manifests. And this is huge. My manifest started getting more complicated. There's a lot of edge cases. How many people have written Puppet or Chef code? Just curiosity. Okay. For those of you that haven't, there's this huge pain in the ass when you're trying to even support CentOS 5 versus CentOS 6, let alone when you're trying to support CentOS 5 and Ubuntu. It's not fun. The next thing is I know that integration tests are coming. I'll talk about what integration testing is in a few minutes. And it made me excited. If anything I can impart, if you're not having fun doing this job, find something else. Find a different part of this wonderful world of ops or dev. Have fun. If you're not having fun, it's just not worth your time. So what is testing? There's basically 4 different types of testing. I'm sure that there are people that could give me even more types, but we're going to break them into these 4 types. So syntax checking, linting, unit tests, and integration tests. Okay, so syntax checking. We all do this, especially if you're a Puppet user, because in the Puppet world, you're writing in a DSL, so you want to check that your DSL manifests are actually syntactically correct. It's not just a matter of compiling that code. So we're going to just run the quick command. Okay, I got the curly braces in the right place. I'm not missing colons. It's all good. It's super important, but yeah, not really all that useful other than it doesn't break things. So linting. This was something I thought that was super dumb when I first looked at it. So definition time, linting is the process by going through your code and meeting best practices from a visual level and all those little things about documentation and not writing your code in certain ways and writing it in other ways. So the best example is, how many are Vim users, Emacs users? Okay. For a lot of us, we use Vim RC files, or for Emacs folks, is there like an Emacs RC, I'm sure? Something? Okay. Same idea. You deal with the tab problem really well because your editor just fixes the tabs. That doesn't work when you all of a sudden start pushing your code to GitHub. And you look at that code or cat out your code and realize, oh, those are tabs there, and those are 2 spaces there, and you've got this really jagged edge that doesn't make any sense at all. So in the linting space, there are 2 really big pieces of software. On the Puppet side, you've got Puppet Lint, and on the Chef side, Food Critic. It makes it easier to read your code. Period, straightforward and simple. If you're linting, your code will be more readable. Also, it reminds you to do little things like, oh, I don't know, documentation. Do you have at least 1 line of comment that explains what this module does? It's all those little things that we all know that we should, and unless you've got something screaming at you telling you do it, you don't do. So unit tests. This is, and I really don't understand this in the development world except to know that like you pass value and pull back value, but in the Puppet world, there's rspec Puppet, and unit tests, backing up just a second, unit tests are very specifically, you're testing small bits of functionality. You're not necessarily checking that the function did what it was supposed to, you're just checking the return value. Did it return correctly? So in Puppet, we have rspec Puppet, which is Puppet-specific language things on top of rspec to make it easier to test Puppet code. In the Chef world, there are multiple tools, and it was really fuzzy, and a lot of the Chef testing kind of skips over unit testing and goes straight to integration testing. So you'll want to, if you're doing Chef, you should look into the different testing frameworks and find the right one for you. So we're testing that code returns what's expected. Very specifically in Puppet, we're testing the catalog. So for those of you that aren't Puppet users or haven't ever seen this stuff before, what happens is Puppet goes through and says, okay, here's a file resource, here's a service resource, and it spits out a catalog. That catalog, it then sends over to the agent, and the agent parses that catalog and makes it live. Well, we're taking that catalog and checking to make sure it meets the needs that we've specified. The other thing that's really neat with unit testing is since you're testing the catalog, if your catalog doesn't compile, you can't test it. So you don't have to do syntax checking because it's there for you. Okay, so integration test. This is, did it actually work? Just by show of hands, how many people know what Vagrant is? Are using Vagrant? Okay. The simplest way, even without a test harness or test framework, is go look at Vagrant, go download Vagrant, and just apply your stuff to a Vagrant box, and hey, you can actually test it. It gets really neat with, and I'll talk about some of the other projects going on later that are happening in the chef community that make this really, really awesome. But you're really, with an integration test, checking to make sure that it worked. Did the file actually get laid down on disk? Did the service actually get started? Did the package actually get installed? Versus, is the file in the catalog? Is the service marked to be started? Is the package marked to be installed? Okay, so when to test? It's driving development, right? So start with it. It makes it a lot of fun. There's a great talk by R. Tyler Croy from PuppetConf this last year that really talks about red-green testing, and you should go watch it. I've got a link at the end of the slides where that is. So before you start writing code, after you've found a problem in prod or dev, this is really, you put down code and config that you expect, and it doesn't work, so you make a couple changes, and hey, it works now. So put that into your tests. And then, obviously, as you go. As you make changes to your Puppet manifest to deploy some new piece of software, as you make changes to your chef code to deploy new software, to deploy new services, make the changes. So let's talk about what to test, because this is, I think, if you get nothing from what I'm talking about, this is the part that really changed everything for me. Obviously, we're going to start with the basic stuff. Hey, did we mark it for install? Is that config being put in the right place for this platform? Because we all know that if you're installing Apache config, depending on what distro you're on and what version of what distro you're on, it can go in different places. Check also, is the service being started? Important config elements. This is where it really hit home for me. So is that include directive that makes all of your stuff work actually in the config file? How about that stupid rewrite rule that actually fixes some problem in production so that you don't get woken up at night? Hey, we should test and make sure that's there the next time we push to production. Are the search domains in the right order? Are we setting the right options for Solar? The list goes on. You're checking your configuration to make sure it actually is what you expect it to be. So security concerns. How many people deal with InfoSec at all? Okay, talk to InfoSec people. Okay, I know they're bad and scary, but it's not that bad. And it's really nice when you can go to them and say, hey, those standards that you sent me that you want to see, here are tests. And here, I can prove that every time we go to production, we've looked at our production configuration, and we're meeting your security standards. So really simple things. Is logging enabled? As a side note, I work in a PHP shop right now, so as you may see references to PHP code, it's because we run PHP. Are we disabling display errors in PHP? Because you really don't want everybody in the world to know that on line 137, someone forgot a semicolon. Environment differences. So we all want to keep prod and dev as close as possible, but there are a lot of things that you just kind of want a little different. What if we could test for those? So make sure that when we go to production, we didn't accidentally leave debug on. Or how about when you're giving your devs access, you're not leaving caching on, and they're not sitting there refreshing. Why the heck is this not working? Well, because the cache is enabled. So it gives you a really easy way to just check your configuration. Hey, is caching enabled in dev? Yeah, that's bad. Fix it. Is your debug on in prod? Yeah, we don't want that. Let's fix that. Uh, yeah, this just explains it for itself. How many times have you sat for hours and days even sometimes trying to figure out why the fuck is it broken? Why won't this work? And then you find that it's this stupid little option that someone, when they were building out the template, accidentally changed the order on the include directives in Apache. And you would think it would just work the way it is, and no, it doesn't. So the best part to do with testing is add these things that have taken away hours and days of your life and put them in tests so it doesn't happen to you again, and more importantly, it doesn't happen to your coworkers in the future. So this is where it really gets fun, I think, is the next steps. So automation via continuous integration. So the idea here is I push up my code, and the tests get automatically tested. Back up. I push my code, my Puppet code or my Chef code, and it gets tested automatically and then gets put into production. This is awesome. That's going to be my next big step, is automating this process. If you take a look, especially in the Chef community, there is Test Kitchen, and I'm seeing some work being done by Puppet Labs to do something similar, and also folks in the Puppet community making Test Kitchen work with Puppet. But Test Kitchen is essentially you write this series of tests, and you run, I forget what the command is, I think it's just rake test, and it spins up a virtual machine in Vagrant and runs a bunch of tests against things after it's been deployed in a virtual environment. How cool is that? And then I think finally for me, I'm really looking at what tests are we actually running in production? What tests are going to wake me up? Because I really don't like it when Knock calls me at 3 a.m. It's just not fun. I've got to get up in an hour, and, you know, it just doesn't work. So if I can test before I deploy new Puppet code, or hell, I can now test before the devs push out new code to the production site because I've given them a complete testing harness for that environment. So really focusing on taking the Nagios and the other monitoring checks that I'm running in production and putting them into my testing harness so that I can actually verify that it worked, verify what's going to happen when it goes into production. Questions? Couldn't have been that boring. Yeah.
He's going to talk from there. Okay, who had a question? Who's got the question?
You hear me? Oh, there we go.
First question.
And I don't mean to like troll your thing, but does anyone, are you actually doing like test-driven development for operations? Like you actually write a test saying you like get / some service, expect response, and then you deploy that service to make sure you get that response, or how does it?
Well, okay, so this gets back to we're unit testing Puppet code. So what I do is I write a test that says, okay, did this service get marked to be started? And or are these configuration elements in the configuration? And I run rake spec until it passes with all green tests. We're not actually in. That's that difference between unit testing versus integration testing. That's the next step, is integration testing of stand up a full instance and test to make sure that yes, the production code produced what I expected.
Hey, well, doing TDD on the dev side, normally you start, well, if you're using a tool kind of like Quick Check or anything like that, you generate a bunch of data and then you test on that and you simplify. Do you do anything analogous?
I don't, and I'd love to see suggestions on ways that I should. But this gets back to I just am not a developer, so this is a whole new and interesting world to me. So if you've got suggestions and have played with that idea, I'd love to see it. I just don't see where we're very specifically handing a specific input and getting and looking for a specific output. The input we're not going to send random data at the test because it just, I would hope that you're not sending random configuration at your systems. Yeah, that might be interesting though.
Any other questions for Chris? Okay, hey, Chris Weber, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.